Happy Mother's Day, my daughter said with a bright smile as she handed her mother-in-law the keys to a brand-new Mercedes. A few minutes later, she placed a dollar store greeting card in my hands and told me she hoped I would understand. I did understand. Just not in the way she expected. The moment stayed with me long after the applause faded. My name is Betty Stewart, and I was 69 years old that spring. I had always believed Mother's Day was never about expensive gifts or grand gestures. It was supposed to be about gratitude, about remembering the woman who stayed awake through fevers, drove to piano lessons, packed school lunches before sunrise, and quietly carried the invisible weight of a family for decades. That morning I woke before 6, just as I had for most of my adult life. Sunlight slipped gently through the kitchen curtains while the coffee brewed, filling the house with a familiar warmth. I chose a navy blue dress that had been hanging in my closet for years because my late husband once told me it brought out the color of my eyes. Over it I wore a cream cardigan in case the restaurant's air conditioning was too cold. I brushed my shoulder-length blonde hair until it rested neatly around my face and added the pearl earrings my daughter Sophia had given me on my 60th birthday. Back then, she had hugged me so tightly that she cried before I did. I smiled at the memory while fastening the earrings, wondering when those moments had become memories instead of habits. Sophia had invited everyone to Mother's Day brunch at an upscale country club about 30 minutes from my house. She sounded unusually excited on the phone a week earlier. "Mom, don't make any plans. This year is going to be really special." I believed her because I wanted to. Maybe that was my greatest weakness. I arrived a few minutes early, carrying a small bouquet of fresh white tulips I had picked up from a neighborhood florist on the drive over. They weren't for me. They were for every mother at the table. It seemed like a thoughtful gesture. The hostess led me through the bright dining room where sunlight reflected off polished windows and crystal glasses. Sophia waved enthusiastically from across the room. Samuel stood beside her, offering his usual polite smile. Their daughter Mia bounced excitedly in her chair, already reaching toward me before I even sat down. "Grandma," she shouted happily, wrapping her arms around my waist the moment I reached the table. Her hug felt genuine, warm, uncomplicated. Children rarely pretend. Julie Mitchell, Sophia's mother-in-law, sat gracefully across from me wearing a tailored ivory blazer with a silk scarf around her neck. She greeted me kindly, complimented my flowers, and thanked me for bringing them. We had always gotten along well enough. We weren't close friends, but we respected each other, and there had never been competition between us. If anything, I admired how elegant she always appeared without making anyone else feel small. Brunch began with laughter, fresh fruit, warm pastries, and conversations about Mia's upcoming school recital. Everything felt comfortable. Familiar. Safe. Looking back now, I realize that ordinary moments often disguise extraordinary heartbreak. Halfway through the meal, Sophia stood and tapped her glass with a spoon. Her smile stretched wider than I had seen in months. "Before dessert," she announced, "I have something I've been planning for a long time." Everyone turned toward her. Samuel reached into his pocket and quietly handed her a small velvet box, though she only smiled and shook her head. "Not yet," she whispered before asking everyone to follow her outside. We walked into the parking area where a brand new silver Mercedes-Benz sat beneath an enormous red bow that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight. Gasps filled the air. Mia clapped excitedly. Sophia walked straight toward Julie and gently placed a key fob into her hands. "Happy Mother's Day," she said through happy tears. "Thank you for welcoming me into your family. You deserve this." Cameras appeared almost instantly. Phones were lifted. Samuel recorded every second while strangers walking through the parking lot paused to admire the surprise. Julie looked stunned, insisting she couldn't possibly accept something so extravagant, but Sophia hugged her tightly as everyone applauded. I joined in. Because what else was I supposed to do? I smiled. I truly did. No mother should resent kindness shown to another mother. Yet somewhere beneath that smile, a quiet question had already begun forming. A few minutes later, as everyone admired the new car, Sophia walked back toward me holding a thin white envelope with colorful flowers printed across the front. "And this is for you, Mom," she said cheerfully. I thanked her softly and opened it right there beside the parking lot. Inside was a simple greeting card with a bright yellow price sticker that someone had forgotten to remove from the back. The words inside were short. "Happy Mother's Day. Love, Sophia." Nothing else. No handwritten note. No memory. No message. Just a $20 gift card to a dollar store tucked inside the envelope. I looked down at it for a long moment before raising my eyes toward my daughter. Around us, everyone was still celebrating the Mercedes. No one seemed to notice the little card resting quietly in my hands. No one except Mia, whose curious eyes moved from the shiny new car to my face. I looked back at Mia and forced a gentle smile before slipping the card into my handbag. She tilted her head with the kind of honest curiosity only an 11-year-old could have. "Grandma Betty," she asked quietly, "did Mommy get you something bigger at home?" The question floated through the air for only a second, but it seemed much longer. Sophia laughed a little too quickly. "Oh, sweetheart, Grandma does not care about expensive presents." Mia accepted the answer because children often trust the adults around them, but I noticed Julie studying my face with a thoughtful expression. She had not missed the awkward moment. Neither had Samuel. He shifted his weight uneasily and glanced toward the Mercedes instead of looking at me. We eventually returned inside for dessert. The waitstaff brought slices of lemon cake decorated with fresh berries while conversations slowly returned to normal. At least they sounded normal on the surface. I found myself stirring my coffee long after the sugar had dissolved. Every laugh around the table seemed slightly louder than before, as though everyone was trying to convince themselves nothing uncomfortable had happened. Sophia was busy showing everyone photographs from the dealership. She explained how she had spent months researching the perfect model, choosing the color, arranging the financing, and coordinating the surprise with Samuel. She described every detail with excitement, and every sentence quietly reminded me how much planning had gone into making another woman feel appreciated. I listened carefully, not because I felt jealous of Julie, but because another realization slowly settled into my heart. Thoughtfulness is measured in time, not in dollars. Someone who spends months planning a surprise has already given the greatest gift before any ribbon is tied. Someone who grabs a greeting card while standing in the checkout line gives away something else entirely. Across the table, Mia colored on the paper placemat the restaurant had given her. Every few minutes she looked up at me with the same puzzled expression. Finally she slid the drawing across the table. "I made this for you," she whispered. It was a simple picture of our family standing together beneath a bright blue sky. She had drawn herself holding my hand. I smiled and thanked her, feeling more comfort from that crayon drawing than I had from the envelope still resting inside my purse. Sophia barely noticed. She was answering questions about horsepower, leather seats, and the panoramic sunroof. Samuel complimented the vehicle, although his voice lacked enthusiasm. Julie thanked everyone repeatedly, insisting the gift was far too generous. She looked genuinely overwhelmed. There was humility in her reaction that made me respect her even more. The awkwardness I felt had nothing to do with her. She had done nothing wrong. Still, something inside me refused to settle. As lunch came to an end, people began gathering their handbags and jackets. Samuel stepped outside to bring the Mercedes closer to the entrance so Julie would not have to walk across the parking lot in heels. Sophia followed him with another round of photographs. Mia stayed beside me. "Can I help carry your flowers?" she asked. "Of course," I answered, handing her the bouquet. While we waited near the front entrance, I overheard two women standing a few feet away. They were guests from another Mother's Day gathering and had no idea who I was. One of them smiled toward the parking lot and said, "That daughter really knows how to honor her mother." The other replied, "I think that is her mother-in-law." "Really?" The first woman laughed softly. "Well, I hope she treated her own mother just as well." I quietly looked toward the floor before either of them could notice me. They had unknowingly spoken the very question that had been echoing inside my mind since Sophia handed over the keys. A few moments later everyone walked outside together. The silver Mercedes gleamed beneath the afternoon sun while guests from the restaurant admired it from a distance. Sophia insisted on taking another family picture beside the car. "Come over here, Mom," she called to me cheerfully. I stood beside everyone and smiled for the camera. Looking at the finished photograph on Sophia's phone, no one would ever guess that one mother was holding the keys to a luxury car while the other carried a paper gift bag with a $20 store card tucked inside. Pictures rarely tell the whole story. As people prepared to leave, Julie unexpectedly walked toward me. She gently squeezed my hand and thanked me again for the tulips. There was kindness in her eyes, but also something that looked almost like concern. Before she could say another word, Sophia called her name from across the parking lot. Julie gave me one last thoughtful glance before turning away. I watched the Mercedes pull out of the lot, followed by Samuel's SUV. Mia leaned out the rear window waving enthusiastically until they disappeared around the corner. I stood beside my own 10-year-old sedan for several moments before unlocking the door. When I placed my handbag on the passenger seat, the greeting card slipped out and landed face up. That was when I noticed something I had completely missed earlier. Folded tightly behind the gift card was a small receipt that was never meant to be inside the envelope, and the date printed across the top made my heart skip. I sat in my driveway for several minutes before turning off the engine. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant sound of a lawn mower and a pair of robins hopping across my front yard. Normally I would have gone straight inside, changed into comfortable clothes, and started watering the flower beds. Instead, I remained in the driver's seat with the envelope resting in my lap. The receipt had slipped halfway out from behind the gift card, folded so neatly that it almost looked intentional. I carefully unfolded the thin piece of paper. It was from a Dollar Tree less than 5 miles from my house. The purchase had been made at 9:14 that very morning. The receipt listed a greeting card, a gift bag, tissue paper, and a $20 gift card. Total purchase time, less than 3 minutes. I stared at the printed time until the numbers blurred together. While I had been standing in my kitchen arranging fresh tulips into a glass vase and wondering how special the day might become, my daughter had been rushing through a discount store buying my entire Mother's Day gift in the time it takes to fill a gas tank. I closed my eyes for a moment, not because I wanted to cry, but because I needed to slow my thoughts. Pain has a strange way of changing shape as we grow older. When I was young, disappointment felt loud and dramatic. At 69, it arrived quietly, settled beside me, and asked me to look honestly at things I had avoided seeing for years. I carried the envelope inside and placed it on my kitchen table. The house greeted me with familiar silence. My husband's favorite reading chair still sat beside the window exactly where he had left it before cancer took him 6 years earlier. Sometimes I still caught myself glancing toward it, expecting him to lower his newspaper and ask how my day had gone. He always noticed when something was wrong long before I admitted it. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and stood at the sink looking out toward the backyard. The rose bushes were beginning to bloom. My husband had planted them during our 25th wedding anniversary because he believed beautiful things deserved patience. I smiled sadly at the memory. He would have told me not to judge one day too quickly. He would have reminded me that people often reveal themselves gradually, one small decision at a time. As I sipped my tea, another memory quietly surfaced. About 8 years earlier, Sophia and Samuel had been trying to buy their first home. Housing prices had climbed faster than they expected, and they were worried they would lose the perfect place if they could not increase their down payment. Sophia had cried at my kitchen table, apologizing for even asking whether I might be able to help. I had never forgotten the look of relief on her face when I quietly transferred $35,000 from my savings account. It represented years of careful budgeting after retirement. I never viewed it as a sacrifice. Parents do not usually calculate love in dollars. We simply give when our children need us. Sophia promised she would repay me someday. I laughed and told her she already had by building a happy life. I never asked for a penny back. The memory was interrupted by the soft buzz of my telephone on the kitchen counter. My heart lifted for just a moment, thinking perhaps Sophia had realized she had accidentally left the receipt inside the envelope. Instead, the screen displayed a social media notification. Someone had tagged me in a Mother's Day post. Curious, I opened it. Sophia had already uploaded photographs from brunch. There she was hugging Julie beside the Mercedes, both of them smiling beneath the enormous red bow. The caption read, "Celebrating the incredible woman who welcomed me like her own daughter. Thank you for loving me unconditionally. You deserve the world." Hundreds of comments had already appeared beneath the photographs. Friends praised Sophia for her generosity. Family members called the surprise beautiful and inspiring. I scrolled through every picture. There was not a single photograph of the card she had given me. There was not one picture of us together. I quietly set the telephone down. The omission hurt more than I expected because it was deliberate. She had carefully chosen the story she wanted everyone else to see. I folded the receipt again and tucked it back inside the envelope. I had no desire to confront her while my emotions were still unsettled. Experience had taught me that anger often wins the moment but loses the truth. I wanted to understand before I spoke. Late that afternoon, I stepped outside to check my mailbox. As I walked back toward the porch, my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Campbell, waved cheerfully from across the street. "Betty," she called, "I saw your daughter's Mother's Day pictures. What an amazing surprise. You must be so proud of her." I smiled politely and thanked her. It was easier than explaining a story no one could see. After dinner, I carried the envelope upstairs intending to place it inside the small keepsake box where I stored birthday cards from my husband and handmade drawings from Mia. As I slipped the receipt back into the card, something else slid loose from behind the folded paper. It was not another receipt. It was a tiny handwritten note on the back of an old grocery list, and the handwriting belonged unmistakably to Sophia. My fingers hesitated before unfolding the small piece of paper. It was not a letter. It was nothing more than a grocery list written in Sophia's familiar handwriting. Milk. Eggs. Coffee. Paper towels. At the bottom, squeezed into the remaining space as though it had been added in a hurry, was a single sentence. "Grab Mom's card on the way if there is time." I read it twice before quietly setting it on the table. The words themselves were not cruel. They were ordinary. That was what made them hurt. They confirmed what my heart had already begun to suspect. My Mother's Day gift had never been part of a thoughtful plan. It had been an errand. Something to remember only if there happened to be enough time before brunch. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the room. The evening sun stretched across the hardwood floor, casting long golden shadows that made the house feel even quieter than usual. There are moments when life changes without anyone raising their voice. No dramatic confrontation. No slammed doors. Just one small piece of paper revealing the truth you have been trying not to see. I carefully folded the grocery list and slipped it back inside the envelope. I refused to let anger make decisions for me. If I had learned anything during nearly 7 decades of life, it was that emotions fade, but choices remain. I wanted to understand how we had reached this place before deciding what to do next. The following morning I followed my normal routine. I watered the roses, read the newspaper on the back porch, and called the local library to renew a novel I had borrowed the week before. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, however, I found myself replaying years of family memories through a different lens. I remembered the afternoons when Sophia dropped Mia off at my house because a meeting had run late. Sometimes she called with only 20 minutes of notice. I always said yes. I remembered weekends spent driving Mia to soccer practice when both of her parents had work commitments. I remembered countless dinners prepared for all of them after long days because I knew they were tired. None of those moments had ever felt like obligations. I loved helping. Family is supposed to make life lighter for one another. Yet for the first time, I wondered whether my willingness had quietly become an expectation instead of a gift. Around noon my telephone rang. It was Sophia. I answered warmly, determined not to let yesterday's disappointment shape my voice. "Hi, Mom," she said cheerfully. "I just wanted to make sure you got home safely yesterday." "I did," I replied. There was a brief pause before she continued talking about how many people had loved the Mother's Day photographs online. She laughed while describing the hundreds of comments and how several of her coworkers had called the surprise unforgettable. Not once did she ask whether I enjoyed my own gift. Not once did she mention the card, the receipt, or the little grocery note that had accidentally traveled home with me. Instead, she asked if I could watch Mia after school on Thursday because she and Samuel had a dinner meeting across town. The request was delivered with the same comfortable confidence she had always used, as though my answer had already been decided. I looked out the kitchen window toward the roses my husband had planted years ago. For the first time in a very long while, I did not answer immediately. The silence on the telephone lasted only a few seconds, but it seemed to surprise Sophia. "Mom?" she asked gently. "Are you still there?" "Yes," I answered calmly. "I am just checking my calendar." There was no calendar in front of me. I simply needed those extra moments to realize something important. I had spent years making myself available before anyone even asked. Somewhere along the way, availability had become invisible. We arranged for me to let her know later that afternoon, and the conversation ended pleasantly enough. She had no idea that anything was different. After hanging up, I placed the telephone on the counter and stood quietly for several minutes. Saying yes had always been automatic. Now I found myself asking a question I had never considered before. Was I helping because they truly needed me, or because everyone had grown accustomed to me never saying no? That afternoon I decided to organize a drawer filled with old family photographs. I smiled at pictures of Sophia as a little girl wearing oversized rain boots, birthday parties with homemade cakes, camping trips, school concerts, and Christmas mornings. Then one photograph caught my attention. It had been taken nearly 10 years earlier on another Mother's Day. Sophia was hugging me tightly, holding a handwritten card she had made herself because, as she told everyone back then, store cards never say enough. I stared at that photograph for a long time, trying to understand where that young woman had gone. Just then, another notification appeared on my telephone. This one was not from Sophia. It was from Julie, and the message was only one sentence long. "Betty, I think we should have coffee. There is something you deserve to know." I replied to Julie's message after sitting with it for nearly 10 minutes. My response was simple. "Coffee sounds nice. Whenever you are free." She answered almost immediately and suggested a quiet cafe on the edge of town the following afternoon. It was a place known more for homemade pies than crowded lunches, and I suspected she had chosen it because conversations could remain private there. The next day I arrived a few minutes early. The cafe smelled of fresh cinnamon rolls and dark roasted coffee, and soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. I chose a small table near the window where sunlight warmed the polished wood. A waitress filled my coffee cup before I had even opened the menu. I watched people pass outside while wondering what Julie could possibly know that I did not. She arrived exactly on time, dressed in a pale blue sweater and white slacks, carrying herself with the same quiet elegance she always seemed to possess. When she reached the table, she smiled warmly, but there was concern behind her eyes that had not been there on Mother's Day. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she settled into the chair across from mine. "I hope I am not overstepping." "You are not," I answered honestly. "Your message made me curious." She wrapped both hands around the warm coffee mug after the waitress served her. For several moments neither of us spoke. It did not feel uncomfortable. It felt like two women choosing their words carefully. Finally Julie looked directly at me. "Betty, I have been tea." My eyes moved slowly down the conversation on Julie's telephone. Samuel's message was simple. "What are we doing for your mom?" Beneath it, Sophia had replied, "She does not care about expensive gifts. She is happy with anything." At first, I wanted to believe those words came from love rather than convenience. Then I continued reading. The next sentence removed all doubt. Besides, if I spend too much on Mom, people on Samuel's side might think I play favorites. I need to make a good impression where it counts. I stared at the screen without speaking. Julie quietly waited. She did not rush me or try to explain away what had already explained itself. Finally, I looked up and gave her a small, grateful smile. Thank you for showing me this. She looked almost surprised by my calm response. You are not angry? She asked gently. I shook my head. I think I already used up my anger before I arrived. What I feel now is something different. She nodded as though she understood exactly what I meant. Disappointment? She asked. No, I answered after a thoughtful pause. Freedom. Julie tilted her head slightly. I continued. Quietly. When someone finally shows you how they see you, you stop exhausting yourself trying to guess. She smiled sadly. That is a wise way to look at it. We remained at the cafe for nearly another hour, talking less about Sophia and more about life itself. Julie shared stories about raising Samuel after becoming a widow in her early 40s. I spoke about my husband, about the years we struggled to build a stable home, and about the joy of watching Sophia grow into adulthood. There was no competition between us. In fact, I realized we had more in common than either of us had ever imagined. Before we left, Julie reached across the table one final time. Betty, she said sincerely, please do not let this come between us. I would like us to remain friends. I smiled warmly. I would like that too. As we walked toward the parking lot, she stopped beside her Mercedes and quietly added, if you ever decide to speak with Sophia, do it because you want peace, not because you want an apology. Sometimes those are two different things. Her words stayed with me all the way home. That evening, I sat on my back porch watching the sun disappear behind the maple trees. I thought about every sacrifice I had made over the years. None of them suddenly became mistakes simply because someone failed to appreciate them. Love freely given is never wasted. But continuing to give without respect is something entirely different. Around 7 o'clock my telephone rang again. This time it was Samuel. He sounded unusually hesitant. Hi, Betty, he began. I hope I am not interrupting dinner. Not at all, I replied. How are you? There was a brief silence before he answered. Actually, I wanted to check on you. His voice carried genuine concern. I have been thinking about Sunday. I thanked him, waiting to hear what came next. I know things probably looked. He stopped searching for the right word. Uneven. That is one way to describe it, I said gently, trying not to make the conversation uncomfortable. Samuel sighed quietly. I suggested we do something more meaningful for you too. I remained silent. Sophia kept saying you would understand because you never cared about gifts. Another long pause followed. I should have pushed harder. Those words meant more to me than he probably realized. They were not an excuse. They were accountability. Thank you for telling me, I said honestly. It matters that you did. Samuel sounded relieved. Would it be all right if Mia came over this Saturday for a few hours? She has been asking about you ever since Sunday. I smiled for the first time that evening. Mia is always welcome. Thank you, he replied. She made something for you after we got home. She keeps saying she forgot to give it to you. After we ended the call, I found myself thinking less about Sophia and more about Mia. Children learn what love looks like by watching the adults around them. Perhaps this was not only about healing my relationship with my daughter. Perhaps it was also about teaching my granddaughter that kindness should never depend on who is watching. Saturday arrived with bright blue skies and unusually cool weather for late spring. Mia ran to my front door carrying a small canvas tote bag almost as big as she was. She hugged me tightly before stepping inside. We baked chocolate chip cookies together, watered the roses, and spent the afternoon assembling a 1,000-piece puzzle across my dining room table. She laughed whenever we accidentally tried forcing pieces into the wrong places. Grandpa used to say puzzles only work when you stop trying to make the wrong pieces fit, she said innocently. I smiled because those had indeed been his words. Later that afternoon, while I was washing cookie bowls in the kitchen, Mia wandered into the living room where family photographs covered one wall. She stood quietly in front of them for several minutes. Then she looked back toward me with an expression far more serious than any 11-year-old should wear. Grandma, she asked softly, can I tell you something Mommy asked me not to tell anybody? I set the dish towel down and walked into the living room, careful not to let my expression reveal surprise. Mia was still standing in front of the wall of family photographs, her eyes fixed on a picture of Sophia and me from many years ago. I knelt beside her so we were at eye level. You can always tell me how you feel, I said gently. But you never have to tell me something that would make you uncomfortable. She looked down at the floor and twisted the strap of her canvas bag around her fingers. I do not want Mommy to be mad, she whispered. I understand, I replied. And I do not want that either. She thought quietly for another moment before speaking. Mommy told me not to show you the picture I made before Mother's Day. My heart tightened, though I kept my voice calm. What picture? Mia opened her tote bag and carefully pulled out a folded sheet of construction paper. She handed it to me with both hands. It was another drawing, far more detailed than the one she had given me at the restaurant. She had drawn our entire family standing together in front of my little house. Bright flowers lined the walkway, and everyone was smiling. Across the top, written in large colorful letters, were the words, Happy Mother's Day, Grandma Betty. In the corner she had drawn a tiny heart beside my name. It is beautiful, I said honestly. Why did you think I was not supposed to see it? Mia bit her lip. I wanted to give it to you at brunch, but Mommy said today was mostly about Grandma Julie because she had a bigger surprise planned. She said I could give it to you later because you would understand. Hearing those familiar words again no longer felt like a coincidence. They had become a pattern. You will understand. She always understands. Those words sounded kind on the surface, yet they had quietly become permission to place me second without guilt. I smiled at Mia and carefully folded the drawing so it would not crease. Thank you for bringing this to me, I said. I am going to keep it somewhere very special. Relief spread across her face. She wrapped her arms around me without saying another word. Children often sense love more clearly than adults explain it. We returned to the puzzle in the dining room, laughing whenever we found another piece that fit. The afternoon settled back into its peaceful rhythm, but my thoughts had changed. Around 3 o'clock, while Mia was coloring at the kitchen table, the front doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Sophia standing on the porch wearing sunglasses and holding her car keys. She smiled, although it looked hurried rather than relaxed. Hi, Mom, she said. I finished earlier than I expected, so I thought I would pick Mia up now instead of waiting until 5. Of course, I answered, inviting her inside. She stepped into the house and immediately complimented the smell of fresh cookies. Mia ran into the hallway with flour still dusted across the front of her shirt. Mommy, look what Grandma and I made. Sophia laughed and hugged her daughter. For a brief moment everything appeared perfectly ordinary again. Then her eyes landed on the colorful drawing resting beside the puzzle box. I watched the smile disappear from her face almost instantly. Mia, she said a little too quickly, I thought we packed that away. Mia looked confused. I wanted Grandma to have it. Sophia glanced toward me before forcing another smile. Sweetheart, we talked about giving that later. I answered before Mia could feel responsible for the awkwardness. She gave me a wonderful gift today. I love it. Sophia nodded, but she avoided looking directly at the drawing. She began gathering Mia's jacket and tote bag with unusual urgency. As she reached for the bag, the small envelope containing the Mother's Day card and grocery notes slipped from the corner of my kitchen counter onto the floor. It landed between us with the receipt partly visible. Sophia froze for only a second, but it was enough. She recognized the receipt immediately. Her face lost its color. She bent down quickly, picked up the envelope, and stared at it without speaking. "Mom," she said quietly, "where did you get this?" I looked at her calmly. It was inside the card. She swallowed hard and turned the envelope over in her hands. I thought I had taken everything out. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Mia looked from her mother to me, sensing a conversation she could not yet understand. Sophia finally forced a small laugh that sounded painfully uncertain. "That was just an old shopping list. It does not mean anything." I held her gaze without raising my voice. "No," I replied softly. "I think it means exactly what it says." Sophia looked away first. She quickly ushered Mia toward the front door, promising they would call later in the evening. Before stepping outside, she paused with one hand on the doorknob. Without turning around, she asked in an almost whispered voice, "Did you read everything that was inside the envelope, or just the receipt?" I met Sophia's eyes for a long moment before answering. "I read all of it," I said quietly. She closed her eyes for just a second, almost as if she had expected that answer but still hoped for something different. Mia stood beside her, holding the container of leftover cookies I had packed for the ride home, completely unaware of the weight hanging in the hallway between her mother and grandmother. Sophia forced a smile for her daughter and gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "Go wait in the car for me, sweetheart. I will be there in a minute." Mia nodded obediently, hugged me once more, and skipped toward the driveway. As soon as the front door closed behind her, the silence changed. Sophia slowly turned back toward me. "Mom," she began, "it was never supposed to happen like this." I folded my hands together and leaned lightly against the kitchen counter. "Then tell me how it was supposed to happen." She opened her mouth, but no words came. For several seconds she searched for an explanation that sounded reasonable enough to survive being spoken aloud. Finally she sighed. "I know it looks terrible." "It does," I answered gently. "Because it was." She looked down at the envelope still resting in her hands. "The grocery note was just something I scribbled while I was busy. It does not mean I do not love you." "I never questioned whether you loved me," I replied. "I questioned how much thought you believed I deserved." That sentence seemed to reach her in a way that anger never could have. She slowly lowered herself into one of the kitchen chairs and rubbed her forehead with both hands. "Everything got out of control," she admitted. "Samuel's family has always been generous with gifts. Every holiday feels like some huge event. I wanted them to see that I appreciated Julie." I nodded. Slightly. Appreciating one mother does not require overlooking another. She looked at me with tired eyes. "I know that now." We sat quietly for several moments before she spoke again. "You have always been so understanding." I honestly thought. "I thought you would not care." Hearing those words aloud no longer hurt the way they had a few days earlier. Instead, they finally revealed the real problem. "Sophia," I said softly, "being understanding does not mean I stop having feelings. It simply means I have spent years choosing not to burden you with them." Her eyes filled with tears she quickly brushed away. "I never wanted you to feel second." I gave a small, sad smile. Intentions matter. But actions teach people what we truly value. The room fell quiet again. Outside, I could hear Mia humming to herself while she waited patiently in the car. The ordinary sound somehow made the conversation feel even more important. Sophia looked around the kitchen, her eyes settling on the old family photographs displayed above the sideboard. "I have been so busy trying to prove myself," she admitted. "I kept worrying about fitting into Samuel's family, making good impressions, showing everyone that I belonged." She looked back at me. "I forgot I never had to earn my place with you." That sentence lingered between us. It was probably the most honest thing she had said all afternoon. I slowly reached across the table and rested my hand over hers. "You never had to earn my love," I agreed. "But respect is different. Respect must be practiced, especially with the people who love us unconditionally." She lowered her head and quietly cried for a moment. I let her. Some lessons cannot be rushed. When she finally looked up, she asked the question I had been expecting since Mother's Day. Can you forgive me? I thought carefully before answering because forgiveness is too important to become an automatic response. Yes, I said honestly. I already do. Relief immediately crossed her face, but before she could speak again, I gently continued. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. She slowly nodded. I understand. I hope so, I replied kindly. Because things need to change. Not as a punishment. As a boundary. She listened without interrupting. From now on, I said, if you need help with Mia, ask because you need help, not because you assume I will always rearrange my life. If you want to celebrate me, do it because you genuinely want to, not because a holiday reminds you at the last minute. And if you ever tell yourself that I will understand, stop and ask whether you are using that thought to excuse giving me less than you would give someone else. Sophia quietly wiped another tear from her cheek. You are right, she whispered. I have done that for years. We both heard a car door close outside. A moment later there was another knock at the front door. Sophia frowned. Were you expecting someone? I shook my head and walked toward the entrance. When I opened the door, I found Samuel standing on the porch beside Julie. Neither of them looked surprised to see Sophia's car in the driveway. Julie held a small bakery box tied with blue ribbon, while Samuel carried a worn leather folder tucked beneath his arm. He looked directly at Sophia before turning toward me. I think, he said quietly, it is time everyone hears the whole truth, because there is something none of us realized until this morning. I stepped aside and invited Samuel and Julie into the house. Sophia looked as surprised as I felt, and for a moment none of us spoke. Mia peeked through the front window from the driveway, curious but content to wait in the car as Samuel gave her an encouraging wave. Julie placed the bakery box on my kitchen counter with a gentle smile. I thought we might all need dessert, she said softly, bringing just enough warmth to ease the tension. Samuel remained standing, the leather folder still tucked beneath his arm. I am sorry for arriving unannounced, he said. But after my conversation with Julie this morning, I realized something that could not wait. Sophia looked from one face to another. What is going on? Samuel slowly opened the folder and removed several neatly organized documents. When we purchased the Mercedes, we financed part of it and paid the rest with money we had saved over the past 2 years. That part is true. He paused before continuing. What I discovered this morning is how that savings account became possible. Sophia frowned. What do you mean? Samuel looked directly at her. For years, your mother has been helping us in ways we stopped noticing because they became normal. He gently laid a handwritten list on the table. I spent the morning adding everything together after talking with our accountant. He pointed to the first page. Thousands of hours of childcare that would have cost us well over $50,000. The down payment your mother gave us for our first house. Holiday dinners she paid for when we were struggling. School supplies. Emergency repairs. Countless weekends when she canceled her own plans so we could work or travel. We built our savings because she quietly carried expenses we never had to think about. The room fell completely silent. Sophia stared at the pages as though she had never seen her own life written down before. Samuel continued gently. The Mercedes was never really purchased by only us. It was purchased partly because Betty spent years making our lives easier without asking for anything in return. Sophia covered her mouth with one trembling hand. She slowly looked toward me, and for the first time since Mother's Day, I saw no defensiveness in her eyes. Only understanding. I never added it all together, she whispered. I never even thought to. I smiled sadly. That is often how love looks. It becomes so dependable that people stop seeing it. Julie reached over and folded my hand inside hers. Betty, she said quietly, I hope you know that your kindness has never been invisible to everyone. I thanked her with a grateful smile. Samuel turned back toward Sophia. This is not about comparing mothers, he said. My mother deserved appreciation. But so did yours. We should never have acted as though honoring one required overlooking the other. Sophia nodded through tears. She walked slowly across the kitchen until she stood directly in front of me. Mom, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I cannot change what happened. I cannot erase the photographs or the card or the choices I made. But I can stop making those choices from today forward. I looked at her for a long moment before embracing her. It was not because everything had suddenly been fixed. It was because healing often begins with honesty instead of perfection. We stood together quietly while years of unspoken expectations seemed to loosen their grip on both of us. A few minutes later Mia came running inside after Samuel called her from the driveway. She immediately noticed that everyone had been crying. Did I miss something? She asked innocently. Sophia knelt beside her daughter and smiled through damp eyes. You missed your mother learning something she should have understood a long time ago. Mia looked confused, then reached into her tote bag again. I still have one more present, she announced proudly. She handed me a small mason jar filled with folded pieces of colorful paper. A label on the front read, Reasons I Love My Grandma. I opened the lid and unfolded the first note. You always listen until I finish talking. The second read, You make every ordinary day feel special. Another said, You never forget anybody. My vision blurred as I continued reading. There were dozens of tiny notes, each written in Mia's careful handwriting. No expensive ribbon. No luxury car. Just thoughtfulness. I laughed softly through my tears. This, I said, holding the jar close to my heart, is one of the greatest gifts I have ever received. Everyone smiled, including Sophia. 1 year later, Mother's Day arrived again. There were no cameras waiting outside, no dramatic surprises, and no oversized bows tied to luxury cars. Instead, our family gathered around my dining room table for a homemade meal. Sophia arrived early to help cook. Samuel brought fresh flowers. Julie carried one of her famous pies, and Mia insisted that every mother at the table receive a handwritten letter before lunch began. As we sat together, I realized something important. The greatest victories inside a family are rarely loud. They happen quietly, one better choice at a time. I still keep that inexpensive greeting card in the same keepsake box where I store my husband's letters and Mia's drawings. Not because I want to remember the hurt, but because it reminds me of the lesson that changed my life. Love should never require you to accept being treated as an afterthought. The people who truly value you will not simply assume you understand. They will make sure you never have to wonder where you stand.